Today we will start with a new chapter, the Kshara 𝐻𝐵 𝐷्यायाम्याख्यास्यामः यथोवाच भगवान् धन्वन्तरिः. Now, Kshara word itself is a bit used in a broader manner in different contexts. And when Sushruta says about Kshara, that Kshara is totally different from the Kshara referred in many other contexts as such. So, that the broader meaning of the Kshara word used in different contexts is in case in Charaka, Kshara is one of the variety of rasa. Sapta rasa iti nimihi vaideha, and those seventh rasa is considered to be one of the commonly used substance in the food as such. And the guna of the Kshara rasa mentioned in Charaka is Ksharaha punaha ausne taishna lagho upanah kledayate then pashchat vishosheti. So it produces humidifies and then dries up. That condition is that type of the rasa is considered as a kashaya rasa, but later on our tradition says that there are only 6 rasas, that kashaya rasa was removed. But there was a practice of using this kashaya rasa in the food as such, and hence the kashaya rasa, those people who use the kashaya rasa regularly, yehi enam grama nagara nigama janpadah satsutam poinjate, those communities who use the kashaya rasa regularly in the food, they would develop the complications like anthya, shandhya, kalitya, panitya bhadaha, hridaya apakartinascha bhavanti. Those people who are the communities who use the kshara rasa regularly, they are more prone to develop blindness and sterility, or even baldness and so on, or even it's a depression of the produces a depression of the heart, and this is what's mentioned in Charaka. So Kshara was used as a food supplement in many of those contexts. Even in Sushruta, there is a reference of the Kshara being used in the food as such. Vrata, this Hemanta Rutucharya is mentioned like Hemanta Lavana Kshara Tikta Amla Katukotkaram Sasarpi Stailam Ahim Ashanam Hidam Chede. In Hemanta Rutu, Kshara Rasa is considered as one of the optimum food substances as such. So Kshara being used as a food supplement also was known in Sushruta too, but that Kshara is different from the Kshara Paka which we are going to refer to. Or it's also said like in Varsha Rutu, Kshara is considered to be apatya, and among those drug substances which should not be used regularly, Kshara is considered as one of the apatya dravya. Like though it's otherwise is good for the health, it should be used in a restricted manner. Those are Pipali Kshara Halavanamti. Now, the popular Ksharas in many of the Nikhandhas other than Sushruta, they are of different varieties, and that Kshara is different from again the Kshara which is mentioned in Sushruta in the context of Kshara Karma. So this difference has to be understood properly, otherwise there can be confusion. The popular Ksharas in the Nikhandhus are Sajjikshara, Yavakshara, Tankanakshara. These are not really the similar as that of the Kshara mentioned in Sushruta as such. And even Mercury also is considered as named as a Kshara in Amarakosha. Amarakosha, Kshara, Kachota Chapala Rasa Sutaschaparade. Even Mercury is considered named as Kshara as a synonym in Amarakosha as such. So these are all the issues which are related to the word Kshara. Though it's not important, you should have a sensitivity about these issues too. Now coming back to what Sushruta has mentioned, the Kshara mentioned in Sushruta in the context of the Kshara Karma is considered as a Shastana Shastrebhya Ksharaha Pradhanatamaha Chedya Bedya Karnata Tridoshagnatvat Vishesha Kriya Apracharanatya. That Kshara used for the Kshara Karma in Sushruta is a different material, and it's considered to be one of the important tools of the surgeon. And according to Sushruta, it's considered as the most important. Of course, there is a bit of controversy when it goes to the Agni Karma. Later, you will come to that. Akshara Agni Gariyan, Agni is considered to be superior, but again, we are not going to that part of the controversy. The Kshara is considered to be a broad spectrum surgical tool used as a parasurgical instrument for Chedana excision or Bhedana. It can produce a drainage or as an alternative to the incision, or as an alternative to the curating. These 3 surgical procedures can be handled with the Kshara, and the Kshara is one of the Anushastra. And it's also Tridoshagnatvata. It's also as a Tridoshagna and it's a Vishesha Kriya Karanata. The special functions of the Kshara which cannot be achieved by others. And that special function is considered as a Ksharanata, Ksharanatva, Ksharaha. The specific function of the Kshara is a Ksharana. That Ksharana word has different sorts of the interpretations. In commentary, Ksharana is translated or interpreted as a Dustatvam Mamsari Chalanata or Shakanata Ityartha. The any property of removing or display, mobilizing the vitiated contact, tissues of the body, like the Twakmamsa, that's considered as a Ksharana. Anyatu Ksharana Doshanam Chalanata. Another meaning of the word Ksharana is it mobilizes dosha in the body, or then that's one interpretation. So that interpretation, one part is only those vitiated components are affected. Now another this interpretation is Ksharanata Tokmamsa Dihimsanata Ksharanati Tetra Kshapanatva iti patanti. It also can affect the normal tissues like the skin and the soft tissues. That's about the Kshara acid, the Ksharana acid. In Vagbhata, is again somewhat a more highlighted word is used. Charva Shastranam Kshara Shrestha Bhuniyat Chetya Bedari Karmani Kurte Vishameshwapi Dukhavachari Shastreshu Tena Siddhi Mayaksha Atikrutshechu Rogeshu Echapane Pijade. Kshara is considered as superior to the Shastra because it can be used even in those conditions where the Shastra Karma cannot be done, and even in the most very difficult conditions also it can be used, and it can be used internally because of these broader uses of the Kshara. Kshara is considered as a superior one, and all these are considered as a Ksharana. Now, to prove the Ksharana, or what is that Ksharana, one experiment was done, and this is a part of the thesis of Dr. Prahlad. So, what is done in this work is albino rats were abdominal wall of the albino rats were curated, and then the Kshara is applied, and in another set, a control group, acid is alkali, sodium hydroxide was applied. Now, the important is when the Kshara is applied and then the wound tissue from the wound, it was subjected to histology examination. Within 1 hour of the Kshara application, the necrotic changes in the tissues are seen. By 3 days again, the necrotic tissues are now stabilized, and you will see some new fibroblasts coming through. Important is 1 week after the application, in the area where there is a necrosis of the tissue, even the hair follicles are starting growing, development of the hair follicles and the neovascularization, new vessels coming through. It was quite pronounced on 10th day. Now this is a very interesting issue. If you create a necrosed wound by any of the chemicals in any situation, when the necrosis occurs and when it heals, the healing tissue would always have only fibroblasts. The appendages of the skin, like the hair follicles, do not grow over the area. A modern pathology cannot explain how this can occur. A necrotic wound, which is otherwise same as any other necrotic wound produced with the Kshara, but during the process of the healing, there is a generation of the appendages of the skin, like the hair follicles, growing over the area. These hair follicles, which are well developed after the 10th day, that's very classical, and modern pathology cannot explain that. Now, with the modern biochemistry, is it ever possible to generate a hair follicle in the wound scar? This kind of an experiment was done in some and this is a reported experiment. The reference of that is in, and it's published in 2015, where when the wound is healing, a similar experiment of what is done, instead of Kshara, if you use a growth factor, and if the growth factor is applied over the wound area, there is a possibility of the hair follicles growing. And this is a very interesting issue. I am not saying that the Kshara is having growth factor property, but an activity which could be produced due to the growth factor, which is a very sophisticated tool and very advanced method of advanced process of specifying these biochemical contents of the body, it can be achieved by a simple Kshara. That's all the point. I am not equating Kshara to the growth factor. That should be very clear. So it's not producing that. But uh, now, see what happened is the basis is till this report was known, we seen, we couldn't find any obvious evidence of a hair follicle growing in the scar tissue. Only the one way which I could find in the contemporary literature where a hair follicle can be made to grow over a scar is by applying the growth factor over the wound area, and this is a very advanced biochemical tool, and if the similar result could be achieved by a substance which can produce the necrosis of the tissue, at the same time can promote the growth of the hair follicles. It's a extraordinary tool, and the contemporary biochemistry is not able to make out exactly what is a real Ksharana asset. So from my point of view, Ksharana or Ksharana property is such a unique property which can produce a necrosis of the selective tissue, and at the same time can promote the growth of the selective tissues as such. Now, the properties of the Kshara are considered as by Sushruta as Nana Aushadhi Samhayat Tridoshagna. It's a Tridoshagna because there are multiple varieties of drugs used as such. Shuklatvad Saumyaha is having a Saumya property in the sense it doesn't, it protects the tissue because of its white color. This is the hypothesis of Ayurveda. Now, from the contemporary science, you can't say that everything which is white can produce the protection. That's not true. But it is our unique Ayurvedic concept. तस्य सौम्यस्यापि सतः दहन पाचन धारणादिशक्तिः अविरुद्धा. Though it is a Saumya Guna, otherwise Saumya Dravyas, they do not produce the burning or necrosis of the tissue. So even though it is a Saumya, it can continue to have the property of burning or pachana or digesting the tissue or breaking the tissue integrity. That these properties would be persisting even if it is Saumya. आग्नेय औषधि गुण भूयिष्ठात् कटुक उष्णः तीक्ष्णः पाचनः विलयनः शोधनः रोपणः शोषण स्तंभनो लेखनः कृमि आम कफ कुष्ठ विष मेधसां वहन्ता पुंस्वस्य च अतिसेवितः. The other properties of the Kshara are because of the Katurasa and Ushnarasa, this produces a pachana and in the sense digestion or liquefaction of the tissues, and it can mobilize the doshas, it can promote the healing, dry up the secretions, and block the flow of contents as such are curating, and it can even destroy the infective complications or necrotic complications in the body. When it is used in excess, it can even affect the virility. So virility of a person could be affected. Sadvividah Pratisaraniyah Paniyascha. The Kshara are of mainly two types. Pratisaraniya, which can be used for external application, and Paniya for internal application. Tatra Pratisaraniya, the Pratisaraniya Kshara are used in Kushtha, Kitiba, Dadru, Mandala, Kilasa, Bhagandra, Arbuda, Asho, Dustabrana, Nadi, Charmakila, Tirakaraka, Nyacha, Vyanga, Mashaka, Bhakshavidradhi, Krimi, Vishadishu Upadishere, Saptasuja Mukharogeshu, Upadihwa, Adihwa, Upakusha, Danta, Vedarbheshu, Tisrushute Rohinishu, Yeteshveva, Anushastra Pranidhanam. It can be used for the local uses in the sequence of those diseases where the lesion is seen as localized and seen over the surface of the body and where it is accessible, where you can apply the Kshara. Paniyastu, Paniya Kshara is used in Gara, Gurma, Udara, Agnisanga, Ajirna, Arochaka, Anaha, Sharkara, Ashmari, Abhyantara Vidradi, Krimi, Visha, Ashya Supaijare, Ahitastu, Rakta Jvarika Pitta Prakriti, Bala, Ruddha, Durbala, Brahma, Madamurcha, Timira Paritebhya, Anyebhya, Evam Vilebhya. The internal administration of the Kshara can be used in the Gara, the poisons conditions, Gurma, abdominal disorders, or other abdominal disorders which can present with the abnormalities of the digestion or abhyantara with the internal septic complications, and even plus other the creamy conditions as such. Now, in practice, use of Kshara directly internally is not that popular as such. Instead, there are many yogas which contain the Kshara, and those yogas can be administered regularly. And interestingly, most of those yogas which are using the Kshara, they use the trick Ksharas, that either the Yavakshara or so on, not the real Kshara which is mentioned in the context of Sushruta. The Sushruta's Kshara Karma and the Ksharas used in the context of the Kshara Vidya Adhyaya, they are mainly used, predominantly used in Pratisarana for the external application now than really being used internally. This is the current situation. And of course, the Kshara should not be used in the patients with Rakta Pitta Dwara and Pitta Prakriti patient. These are contraindicated because it can produce more complications as such. That's about one. Now, the procedure of preparing the Kshara is explained in Sushruta in detail. And these procedures can be followed or are followed as such, and then only you will get a proper Kshara. A shortcut of a chemical alternative procedure where an alkali is separated and so on cannot do the Kshara, because basically Kshara is a complex process of burning a plant material, and then a ash, water soluble contents of the ash are separated, and then they are processed with some other substances, and that kind of a complex process is involved in the Kshara preparation, and these steps are absolutely important. Now, that procedure, according to Sushruta, is tamja itara kshara dattva parisravayat tasya vistarat anyatra atha itara trividah mrudu madhyah tikshnashta. The kshara could be, the strength of the kshara can be graded into three categories: mrudu kshara, madhya kshara, and tikshna kshara. To prepare the kshara, tam chikirshuhu sharadi girisanjam shuchihi upesha prashaste ahani prashasta deshajatam anubahatam madhyamavesam mahantam asitamushkakam adhivasya aparejyuk patayitva khandasha prakalpya avapatya nivate deshe nichitim krutva sudha sharkarashta prakshipya tilanalehi adipayet. Now, the example given by Sushruta for preparation of the kshara in this context is making use of asita mushkaka, or the palasha, a variety of palasha, which is used for the kshara preparation. Of course, later you will come across the many other drugs which could also be used for the kshara. We'll come to that part. Now, before you prepare, plan for the preparation of the kshara, once you have decided that the kshara has to be prepared, select the right plant which is developing, which has developed well and having in a optimum age, that is developed well as such, and it should be in a preferably in Sharad Rutu, where the plants will be somewhat healthy. Before you cut the tree, you have to give a notice in previous day, inform, so that see the any birds or animals which are living on that plant or near that tree, they are uh, uh, protected, or they can just move out. Now, this shows about the concern about the nature by Sushruta. It's not that you go and cut a tree, you select the tree, and before you cut a tree, it has to be noticed, a notice has to be given, and so that the surroundings in the nature, they get adjusted to that situation. Then, in the auspicious day, you go and cut the tree, cut it into smaller pieces, and burn it with the tilanala, the stems, the dried stems of the tila. अथ उपशान्ते अग्नौ तद्भस्म पृथग्गृह्णीयात् भस्म शर्कराश्च. And when you burn, you'll have to have the seashells, Sudha Sharkara, lime shells have to be added. They also have to be burnt along with the plant product as such. Now, there is a very interesting issue. Kshara is often translated as alkaline, and the ashes which are burnt out, if at all, only when these limestones are added, that becomes alkaline. If the limestones are not added, and if it's only the plant burned as such, the ash need not be alkaline. Some of may be alkaline, some of them may be neutral, some may be even slightly acidic. So that whatever that alkaline, Kshara being translated as alkaline, which is not a real translation, or not a correct translation, and if at all there is a alkalinity in the Kshara, that's due to the crystals added, seashell added during the burning. If this is not added, then the Kshara will not become alkaline. So I stress upon this point because I have seen in some centers they do not add the seashell during the burning, and this doesn't really qualify to be used for the Kshara. अथ उपशान्त्याग्नौ तद्भस्म पृथग्गृह्णीयात् भस्म शर्कराश्च. The burnt ash of the plant has to be collected. Similarly, as in case of the 𝐴𝐶 or palasha, other drugs which could be used were kutaja, palasha, ashwakarna, palibhadra, vibhitaka, arabhuda, tilbaka, arka, snuhi, apamarga, पाटल नट्टमाल वृष कदली चित्रक पूतिक इंद्रवृक्ष आस्पोत अश्वमारक सप्तच्छर अग्निमंत गुंज चतस्रः कोशातकीः समूल फलपत्र शाखाः दहेत. I will come to this part with some more of the information. Once this ash is collected, then ततः क्षारद्रोणं मुदकद्रोणैः षड्भिः आलोड्य मूत्रैर्वा यथोक्तैः एकविंशति कृत्वा परिस्राव्य. So once the ash is collected, this has to be mixed with the 6 times of water or gomutra, and then it has to be filtered 21 times. That filtering 21 times is to ensure that no water insoluble substance comes to the filtrate. And then mahati kadahe shanehi darvya avagattayan vipajeta. That filtered substance is heated in a big vessel with the continuous stirring so that it gradually becomes thickened and the crystallization would occur. स यदा भवति अच्छः रक्तः तीक्ष्णः पिच्छलश्च तमादाय महति वस्त्रे परिस्राव्य इतरं विभज्य पुनरग्नौ अधिश्रयेत. So once it has become somewhat thick as such, you have to filter it again, and then a small part of that has to be kept separately, which is considered ksharodaka, and then the other part is heated further by adding again katasharkara, bhasma sharkara, kshirapaka, shankha, nabihi, agnivarnaha कृत्वा आयस्यपात्रे तस्मिन्नेव क्षारोदके निषिच्य पिष्ट्वा तेनैव दिग्द्रोणे अष्टफलसंयुतं शङ्खनाभ्यादीनां प्रमाणं प्रतिवाप्य सततम् अप्रमत्तश्चेनम् अवघट्टयन् विपजेत. And you will have to add some more of these animal products like the crystals, katasharkara, bhasma sharkara. These are all the varieties of the minerals and animal products which are used to mainly the limestones, varieties of limestones. They have to be heated, and then heated once they have to be added to the ksharodaka, and then that paste is prepared and that paste is added to the main part of the ksharodaka which is being boiled as such. And when it becomes natisandraha, natidravasya bhavati, tatha prayateta, tata enam agat, and this process of adding the katasharkara, etc., the crystals of the shells, etc., that process is called as a prativapa. Now, the important is there is a addition of the seashell or such animal products at 2 stages. One is in the beginning, and then the one is at the end of the process, at later part. The addition of that crystals in the beginning is an essential mandatory component of the preparation of the kshara, whereas the addition of those crystals in the later half is the prativapa. Now, this prativapa would be deciding like whether the kshara would be a pratisarana kshara or tikshna kshara or mrudu kshara. The sajaiva aprativapah pakvah savihumyo mruduho. If you do not add the prativapa, that later part of the crystals is not added, that becomes a mrudu kshara. If it is added, then it becomes a tikshna kshara as such, which could be used for the pratisara. Mrudu kshara is used for paniya. For the internal administration, mrudu kshara is used. So this use of prativapa has to be very clearly understood. And I stress upon this part because I have seen many of the people getting confused with this issue as such. So once the kshara has come up as prepared and it becomes somewhat semi-solid, then avatarya anuguptam 𝐼𝐶𝐫 𝐼𝐶𝐫 𝐏𝐻𝐻. The madhyama kshara is prepared by adding the prativapa, and when it is become somewhat semi-solid as such. Now, the plants which are used for the kshara preparation is an interesting issue. The 𝐴𝐶 is the Shribera asset, and Kutaja, of course, the Palasha, Ashwakarna, Palibhadraka, Vibhitaka, Aragvada, Tilvaka, Snuhi, and Apamarga, Patala, Naktamala, and Virusha or Vasaka, and Kadali, Chitraka, Putika, Indravriksha, Aspota, Ashwamaraka, Saptachara, Agnimantha, Gunja, Koshataki. These are all the named drugs by Sushruta which can be used for Kshara preparation. To find a common property among these is quite difficult. Of course, majority of these are having either Kashaya Tiktarasa or Katurasa as Anurasa, but even that's not universally applicable. And you cannot just group them into either trees or plants or so on. And the majority of the situations, the practical situation, the maximum incidence of the Kshara being used in the practical situation is of the Apamarga, whereas the bigger trees are rarely used. And interestingly, there are many people who are trying with the preparation of the Kshara with any plant as such. Whether it is justified or not, that's another question mark. But you cannot just apply, say that the Kshara Dravya should have a Katurasa or Shayatiktarasa Anurasa, also may not be true because you have some description of the Chincha Kshara used in the Panchakarma procedure. When the Kshara is used as a Kshara Basti, even Gomutra is named as a Kshara. So there is a bit of confusion to, or maybe to standardize that Kshara raw drug, the drug which can be used for the Kshara, by the contemporary method of study would be virtually not possible. So it's better to stick on to what the Samhitas have said as such. Now, again, so Mrudukshara and Madhyamakshara is prepared by adding the crystals of in shells and so on. Now, in the Prativapa, if you add some more of the Tikshna plant drugs like Danti, Dravanti, Chitraka, Rangari, Putika, Pravala, Tala, Putri, Vida, Suvarchika, Kanaka, Kshiri, Hingu, Vacha, Atimshaha, Samaha, Structure Sunaha, Shukti Pramana, Prativapaha, Saya, Saprativapa, Pakwaha, Pakya, Tikshnaha. To make the Kshara Tikshna, you will have to add some more plant products. So this is a very, very complex process. You start with burning a plant, then add some animal product like crystals and then burn it out. Again, filter those water insoluble substances. Then again add some more of the crystals and then it becomes one category of the Kshara. If you do not add that crystals, it becomes a Mrudu Kshara. And in addition to that, a third prativapa, a second prativapa, by using these plant products, if it is added, that becomes a tikshna kshara. So the whole process has a very solid background of modifying the chemical property of the substances. But these modification of the chemical properties cannot be grasped by the contemporary biochemistry. Contemporary biochemistry is not able to do that. Of course, you will find a lot of literature, and even the our Central Council also has produced a compendium on the Kshara preparation as such. In all that, they have tried to standardize that Kshara products and the biochemical property of the Kshara is attempted to be standardized. But I don't think that it would be a perfect standard because the whole process is such a complex issue, and to standardize it, every step would be virtually not possible. So the better is if at all you use a Kshara, the Kshara, it has to be prepared exactly as it is mentioned in the text, without any modifications or without any deviations. तेषां यथा व्याधिबलम् उपयोगः क्षीणबले तु क्षारोदकम् आवेपेत बलकरणार्थं. When you store the Kshara for a long time, if it loses its potency, the potency can be enhanced by adding further Ksharodaka as such. Now, the properties of the Kshara again, they are described in different terms. The Kshara has an extraordinary property of being Naivatikshnaha, Namruduhu, Shuklaha, Shrakshno, Athavichilaha, Avishyanti, Shivaha, Shigraha, Ksharohi, Astaguna Smrdaha. There are 8 qualities of the Kshara which is mentioned, like it's neither Tikshna nor Mrudu, and it's Shuklaha, white in color, Shrakshnaha, somewhat soft or maybe slimy, and it also has the property of sticking to the area. Avishyanti doesn't produce secretions, and it doesn't harm, and it produces produces the activity in a short period. These are considered as the Astaguna. Atimardava, Shvaitya, Ausnya, Taikshnya, Paichilya Sarpitaha, Sandrata, Apakwata, Hina Dravyata, Dosha Uchyate. The defects of the Kshara could be either being very mrudu or very tikshna. Now, the when you use the Kshara which are available in the market, these are all the issues which you have to consider. Otherwise, there could be a blame on the Kshara technique itself. So, and most of the commercially available Kshara preparations, they do not have these properties mentioned in the Samhita as such. Now, the procedure of the Kshara application. तत्र क्षारसाध्यव्याजितं उपवेश्य निमात आतपे देशे असंवादे अग्रोभरणीयोक्तेन विधानेन उपसंहृतसंभारं ततो अस्य तमवकाशं निरीक्ष्य अवघृष्य अवलिख्य प्रच्छयित्वा शलाकया क्षारं प्रतिसारयेत् दत्त्वा वाक्षतमात्रं वेक्षेत. The kshara has to be applied over the lesion, localized lesion, where maybe it could be hemorrhoids, it could be the wart, or so on, and it should be applied over the area after having a proper preparation of the patient, and the area has to be rubbed first to increase the vascularity, or even if you may have to do a lekhana, minor curating also has to be done, and then you apply the kshara. It's not applied over the integral keratin tissue. The keratin tissue of the surface has to be broken. If at all, it has to be applied over a keratinized area. But when it is applied over the hemorrhoids where there is no keratinized skin, then that curating may not be very essential as such. So once it is applied, and you have to wait for Vakshata Matram, 100 seconds. 100 seconds is the standard time for the Kshara to produce its activity. That's also very important issue. Kshara is used only for temporary activity of producing the lysis of the tissue. It's not continuously applied. It's not something which can be applied over a wound for healing as such. Tasmin nipachide vyadho krishnata datthakshanam. Once it has produced the optimum effects, there will be blackish color produced due to blockage of the circulation. तत्र अम्लवर्गः शमनः सर्पिः मधुकसंयुतः अथ चेत् स्थिरमूलत्वात् क्षारदग्धं न शीर्यते इदमालेपनं तत्र समग्रम् अवचारयेत् अम्लकाञ्जिकबीजानि तिलान् मधुकमेव च प्रपेश्य संभागानि तेनैनम् अनुलेपयेत्. The kshara, once the effect of the kshara is produced, the samyak daddha has been seen, then you have to wash out the kshara with some sour substance, amlavarga, any of the amlavarga, it could be limborasa, amlakajika, and so on, which are supposed to have a neutralizing effect over the kshara, and then the wound has to be treated with the madhusarpi. If at all the kshara produces a persistent damage continuously, even after the kshara, this amlavarga has been applied, so if there is a continuous tissue destruction due to some other extraneous factors, then you may apply, the whole wound could be applied, that lesion could be applied with the amlakanjika bijani, amlakanjika or tila, madhu can be applied over, and then put a band, alepa also can be done. Tilakalka samuduktaha grutacto vranaropanah. The tilakalka with the madhu and gruta, it can be used for the ropana, healing of the wound. Now, the logic behind using the amla rasa is rasena amlena tikšnena वीर्योष्णेन च योजितः आग्नेयेन अग्निना तुल्यः कथं क्षारः प्रशाम्यति एवं चेत् मन्यसे वत्स प्रोच्यमानं निबोध मे. There was a question by the student in the classroom, like when amla rasa is also a tikshna dravya and ushna virya. So if you apply the kshara, the amla rasa over the kshara, how it can neutralize the kshara effect? This was a question by a student in the classroom. The Sushruta Samhita is written in the form of a classroom discussion. This is a proof of that. Then the teacher answers, Amlavarjan rasan kshare sarvanyeva vibhavet katukastatra bhuvishtah lavano anurasastata amlena saha sanyuktah satikshna lavano rasaha madhuryam bhajate atyartam tikshna bhavam vimutyate madhuryat shamam apnoti vannihi adbhirivaplutah. The kshara has all the other other 5 rasas except the amla rasa. And predominant rasa is katu rasa and or lavana anurasa. This is what's mentioned in the text. As I have referred to earlier, this cannot be generalized. You will have plenty of other substances where this may not be absolutely true. So it's a bit of controversy there. Now, when it is mixed with the amla rasa, it becomes sweet, madhuryam. Madhuryam labhate. It could be something like the neutralization of an acid with an alkali. So when you use a alkali, this chemical neutralization, you use a alkali and acid, and that results in the formation of a salt. So probably that kind of a chemical activity is suspect. I'm not saying this is the same activity, but somewhat similar concepts are there. तत्र सम्यक् दत्ते विकारोपशमः लाघवं मनस्रावश्च. If the Kshara has produced a optimum result, then the disease will be cured. Patient would have a healthy feeling, and there will be no discharges in wound. If the optimum results are not achieved, then toda kandu jatyani vyadhi vriddhishcha. At the site, there could be itching and even pain, or even the disease may aggravate. So a less than optimum use of the Kshara can result in aggravation. Atidadhet, if at all is more than the optimum, Daha Paka Ragasrava Angamarta Klama Pipasa Murchaha Syuhu Maranam Va. There could be a lot of inflammatory changes, burning sensation, sepsis, or even the color hyperemic changes, and the systemic features like excess of thirst or even impaired consciousness. Even death can occur if the Kshara can produce if the Kshara is applied in excess more than what's necessary. Ksharadagdhavranam yathadosham yathavyadita upakramet. Once the Ksharadagdhavrana has occurred, then you have to treat that wound as you treat any of the wound based upon the doshas. That concept of the use of the different techniques you will come across when we go into the Shastir program. Now, Ksharakirma is contraindicated in Athanete Ksharakrityaha, Durbala, Bala, Sthavira, Bhiru, Sarvangashuna, Udari, Raktapitti, Garbhini, Rutumati, Pravurdha Jarita, Pramehi, Ruksha, Shatakshina, Krishna, Murcha, Upadhuta, Kriba, Apavruta, Budvrta Parayoreha, Tata Marmasira Snai Sandhi Tarunasti Sevani, Dhamani, Galanabi, Nakanda, Shefa, Srotasu, Alpa Mamseshuja, देशेषु अश्नोश्च न तद्यात् अन्यत्र वर्त्मरोगात्. Kshara in contraindications are mentioned based upon the physical condition of the patient, like a patient who is emaciated, very young child, or very old patients, or depending upon the other, or maybe Garbhini, the pregnant woman, or Rutumati during the these menstrual periods. These are not to be used. Or depending upon the other diseases, Kshara cannot be used, and diseases like Sarvangashuna, a generalized edema, Jwara, Prameha, Kshatakshina, Trishna, Murcha, and very important is the Udara. Udara also is considered, particularly Shunaudari. Shunaudari is where there is a ascites. Kshara is contraindicated, but Paniya Kshara is indicated in Udara Vyadhi. So when you use that Kshara as a Paniya Kshara, it has to be very selective. It should be used only in those conditions where the ascites has not yet formed. If the patient has already an ascites and if you apply the Kshara, it may not be work as such, as Sushruta has considered them as a contraindication as such. So that's one more. And it also should not be, the other contraindications also are based upon the anatomical areas like Marma, Sira, Snai, Sandhi, Taruna, Asti, Sevani, Dhamani, etc. Or over the penis, or even in the eyes, except in case of Vartmaroga. In Vartmaroga, Kshara can be applied with caution. In such relatively sensitive areas of the body, Kshara cannot be used. So contraindications of the Kshara can be mentioned as a physical conditions, the disease conditions, anatomical factors which decide about the use of the Kshara. तत्र क्षारसाध्येष्वपि व्याधिषु शूलगात्रम् अस्थिशूलिनम् अन्नद्वेषणं हृदयसन्धिपीडोपद्रुतं न क्षारः न साधयति दुर्बलबालस्थविरादीन् प्रतिसारणीयः इति. Now, even otherwise there is an indication of Kshara. If the patient has already a generalized edema, if there is a pain in the bones, the deep-seated pain, and the patient who is anorexic, who has a cardiac involvement or joint involvement, Kshara cannot be used as such. So it should be very selective. Use of the Kshara should be very selective. Only in those indications, conditions where there is an indication, it should be used as such. विषाग्निशस्त्राशने मृत्युकल्पक्षारो भवति अल्पमति प्रयुक्तः सधीमता सम्यक् अनुप्रयुक्तो रोगान् निहन्यात् अचिरेण घोरान्. Kshara is a very useful tool, and it can be useful only when it is used very selectively with all the experience. If it is used by a inexperienced person irrationally, it can be as harmful as a poison, or it could be fire, or it could be like sharp instrument, or lightning. Now, these categories are mentioned based upon the possible status of complications. Visha, which can kill in due course of time, Agni, which can burn partially, whereas Ashani, lightning, which can produce instantaneous death. So, Kshara can be producing harm in any way. Now, that's about the Kshara asset. Now, Kshara being used in many of those medicines which are used for the wound, and the use of the wound Kshara in wound healing, there are a lot of confusion issues. So, from to be brief, I will not go into all that details further. The confusions which are prevailing in the practice, you cannot use the Kshara or any alkaline substance to promote the healing. This would be used only for debridement. Now it's confirmed, or it's well known, that a alkaline pH would be used only for, can be used for the debridement, and it doesn't really promote the healing. It can reduce the rate of healing, whereas a slightly acidic pH is ideal for the promotion of the wound healing. This is based upon the studies done in a large number of patients. So when the pH in the wound and promote this optimum pH for the wound healing is a acidic pH, whereas if there is a stuff and for debridement, a alkaline pH is a better. A alkaline pH is better for the debridement. So Kshara, if at all it produces a alkaline medium in the wound, then it should be used only for the debridement in the stage where there is a slough. It cannot be used on a clean wound, there is no slough. So that's in brief about the possible misuse of the Kshara which do exist in practice. With this, we will conclude. इति सुश्रुतसंहितायां सूत्रस्थाने क्षारपाकविधिः नाम 𝐴कादशोऽध्यायः. Summary: word Kshara is used in different perspectives in different contexts. Kshara preparation is indicated in the sophisticated pharmaceutical techniques of ancient India. Use of Kshara is unique technique of Ayurveda. Multiple sources of Kshara are mentioned in the text, and only a few are explored now. So you'll have to, maybe if at all there is a need for some research, it should be about that use of the Kshara of different plants which are mentioned by Sushruta. Defining the Kshara source by any biochemical means is not yet possible. With this, we'll conclude.